Hello, happy Thursday. It's Jake left, so I got other people with J names, I guess. I now realize that I've fully replaced Jake with a Jacqueline and a Joey. So welcome aboard, and thanks for joining me on what is probably the most chaotic month and a half of space news of all time. Kind of feels that way. I don't know, maybe not even limited to just space news at this point, but
it's been a busy week, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We're gonna have competitive bidding for who wants to bring up which topic next, because there's so much. We'll have to figure out who's, I don't know. Falcon 9's grounded, and that feels like the fifth story that we should talk about. Like, it's almost unimportant.
What would be number one? I mean, that's a pretty big story.
It is, but it's also, I don't know. Let's get into it, because I feel like I'm underreacting to that. So, we're a little earlier than normal. Oh, Jake's trolling us in the chat, too. That'll be fun. So, I don't know if either of you, I think Joey's in the office or something, so I don't know if it's appropriate to have a drink out at 3:30 where you are, but you tell me.
I have a drink.
There you go. A little fuel.
So,
just some coffee. That's the way to do it. Jacqueline, a little darker where you are, less office looking.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at home, but I don't want to be the only one drinking.
You're not. All right. That's what I do the show for.
So I went through our beer fridge to find the appropriately spaced beer. So it's like Hulsar, and it's a little squirrel astronaut dude.
Is it
it's space
a
cider.
Raccoon?
It looks like Sandy from SpongeBob.
It does look like Sandy. Is it a squirrel?
I think it's a squirrel. It's like a Michigan cider place.
Oh, so it's not really a Wolverine, is it?
It's definitely not a Wolverine.
No.
Some kind of rodent.
Yeah.
We'll call it a rodent. A space rodent.
It's a Midwestern rodent of some sort.
It is rodent boy summer, apparently, but... or rat boy summer is what they're saying, but that's not
summer.
space.
I missed that. I think I missed that one.
I did not see that.
Really? Oh my god, okay. I sound
Pizza
so weird
rat?
then.
Different rat.
It's like that guy from The Bear. People say he looks like a rat, which is kind of like really mean, but like the New York Times has been talking about it, so it's okay. I'm joking.
I think it's unfair that it's hot girl summer and rat boy summer.
Rat
that
boys.
feels
Right,
like an
the rat
unrealistic
boys
standard.
are co-opting the hot girl summer rhetoric. Yeah.
Wow. We're on it. I mean, you come here for all of the latest
That's more important than the Falcon 9 grounding.
I'm joining you in the Midwest drinks. I've got another can of Space Camper. This is one of our few and far between and always beloved beer sponsors. Boulevard Brewing sent me a box of stuff. I guess via the Kansas City Royals. It's a strange connection, but this is delicious. So, out of KC. Cracking that baby open. All right. So, Joey, explain or help me overreact to the story, because I think I've underreacted to Falcon 9's grounding, mostly because... all right, riddle me this. The most recent groundings that we've all experienced over the last decade or whatever, right? They were vehicles that were either early in their run, and we had question marks about them anyway, Antares, etc. But I guess in defense of you saying I'm underreacting, even though you didn't say that and I put those words in your mouth, all of those other failures happened at a time when there were other launch vehicles available. Like, you could buy an Atlas V or you could fly on a Falcon 9, and this one happens and there's no other rockets available. So it is larger. But I guess my reaction was like, there's 8,000 Starlink missions. I thought they would go this route where they might get approval to keep flying and then have to finish the investigation before the human side. But what's your vibe on it?
Right. I don't mean to make this sound like it's the biggest deal ever, because you just laid out a bunch of really great points. Like they have asked for that public safety determination, which means, the FAA can say everything's good before they finish the investigation. But also, this isn't the worst failure ever. It is grounded, and they need to figure out a safe way to resume flights. But it seems like a fairly simple issue. There was a liquid oxygen leak on the second stage, and the engine blew up, and then somehow it emergency ejected its satellites or something. I really want to see video of that, because I think that is pretty crazy. But yeah, it seems like a fairly simple issue. And I think the fact that SpaceX requested that public safety determination on July 15th, which is pretty soon after this happened, shows that they think they have a good understanding of what happened, and that, to the extent that they can lay it out in this report to the FAA and seek the FAA's approval of a go-ahead to resume flight. So I think that signals that it's not the biggest deal. I mean, it's important because it highlights the fact that, much of the world perhaps over relies on a single rocket. And so when shit hits the fan, excuse my language, we all are reminded of that. And right now, Falcon 9 is not available. And it's not like everyone's like, how am I going to get my satellite in space? I wanted to launch this yesterday. But like, it could get to that point. But, I don't think it's a huge deal because I think, they might get their FAA approval soon.
It's the ISS side, though, that is like this. It's not the worst time in the world for SpaceX, but it is kind of the worst timing you could imagine for the ISS program. It's pretty.
No.
It's precarious.
Well, the last thing I'll say on that is, like, remember when Chris, what was his name? It was the lone NASA astronaut on the ISS for a very long time, pending, I think, Crew Dragon's availability, and I think there were like 2 Russians on the ISS too, and it was very, very short staffed, and that was right on the fence of like the US getting their own capability. Like, they were about to clear that hurdle. And I think that was probably more dire than what we're doing, what we're seeing now.
Jacqueline's making faces.
We have the 2 Starliner astronauts up there way longer than anticipated, with no set return date and no way to resupply the ISS domestically. So this is something we've been talking about internally. I remember the fights about reliance on Russia and all this stuff. Like, are we in a situation where we're going to have to ask Russia to send up food for the astronauts who are like stuck up there? They're not stuck, but who are up on the ISS.
Here we go.
Much
we just made it onto what's Mark Nappy's Google alerts.
I know. But yeah, I mean, that's something we've been talking about internally, sort of not, and it does, the fact that they have requested this ability to fly from the FAA, like, it doesn't seem like it'll get to that point, but the fact that it feels like it sort of shined a light on the fact that, we really shouldn't want a monopoly, and that, the government saying it doesn't want a monopoly is for a reason beyond just price competition.
Yeah, it definitely makes that point. And you're right. The ISS always has, they occasionally update us on how many months they've stocked away on the ISS, and it's always like close to a year or whatever. But you're right, like, there's 2 extra astronauts on board than the typical expedition, so that does eat into the rations a little bit.
And they don't have their own clothes. Yeah. More attention needs to be brought to this. Remember when Starliner was about to launch, and then they just discovered that toilet issue on the ISS? They had to swap Butch and Sunny's clothes out for, like, the toilet components. And so the astronauts,
that's amazing.
When we asked them about this, so, like, it's okay, we're not going to be up there for long, and we can use the backup clothes on the station. But, like,
they've been wearing those Russian flight suits that look like the Ukrainian flag. Actually, I think that's what they've been. They were not used very long on the station, so they've been wearing those. So that's a scandal. That's a scandal. The clothes scandal needs to be covered more. What are they wearing?
I think I would rather have a working toilet than my own clothes, if we're being totally honest.
Good. Would you rather in space? Yeah.
Right.
All right. That's actually, I never even considered that. There are some funny clothes stories in time. I always bring this one up. I think it was the first operational Dragon mission when there was like a whole 20 minutes of comms between Dragon and ground where they were looking for a sweater and they didn't know what compartment they put it in. I need to go and excerpt this audio because it's hilarious. Like, we checked this cabinet, it wasn't there. We really want to find this sweatshirt because it's kind of cold on board and we can't find it. And they lost the sweatshirt.
In Crew Dragon, or was that on the ISS?
No, on Dragon. It was like on the coast up to ISS. It was a hilarious little sub story. I don't know.
There,
yeah.
Bizarre.
Anyway, Jake's in the chat trolling us from Spain, and he is reminding us of the time that all in a row, Cygnus, Progress, and Dragon all blew up. So you're right that there has been a worse run in time. I think it's just made weirder that. So it's the Starliner situation, right? previously have said maybe Starliner will stay past the Crew 8 departure and still be there when Crew 9 gets up. They sent out the media availability thing for Crew 9 setting no earlier than mid-August at this point. So I'm gonna upgrade that to like probably happening. I don't think Crew 8 will necessarily leave, but it sure seems like this is a great reason to just keep Starliner up there until you don't get the sign-off anymore. Especially when you consider, I feel like at this point, Starliner is not going to make their next slot for the operational thing. Like, they have to say pretty soon that Crew 10's flying early 2025. It seems unlikely to me with all these issues that they would even make the slot after that. So, really, there's no rush of bringing Starliner back. So, if having them on board gets you a little schedule coverage while Falcon 9 investigation happens, like, I don't know. At least it's a thing to blame it on, communications-wise. So I would make that call if I was them.
I mean, if you're Boeing, a publicly traded company, there might be a rush because who's paying for this? I don't think we really have a clear answer on that. This is a fixed price contract. Does that stipulate these types of issues and mission extensions? I wonder how that worked out with SpaceX because they had a pretty long DM2 mission as well. For kind of other reasons, that was when they needed to actually have an operational mission because they were so short-staffed on the ISS, or at least that story seemed more realistic at the time. But in this case, I think to know whether there is actually a rush, we should ask or see who is actually paying for this mission extension. I haven't seen any contract modifications between Boeing and NASA that show last minute financial arrangements related to this extension, but maybe that means Boeing is taking the heat and the cost for this. I don't know, but yeah.
There are also isn't there a battery issue that they said it's good past the 45 days, but that won't be good indefinitely. There are technological limitations that would force them to come home.
Yeah, for sure. The 45-day mark, which is next week or this week, maybe this weekend, that's the nominal duration for Starliner on station, and then the off-nominal duration, using its backup stuff. I think it had been set for 72 days, but then NASA publicly came out and said 90 days. And then, the batteries are the main, determining factor there. I had a story, I think in late 2022, about that and about concerns that NASA had about the batteries. It was a really weird time, and I think there's concerns among some in the astronaut office or the chief engineer office about the potential for them to overheat and potentially catch fire. That has not happened in testing. Boeing has emphasized to me that no batteries have caught fire during testing, but that is the unspoken potential concern for the batteries that are on station right now. And I think when we hear Steve Stitch talk about a cell in this unit getting off nominal or going out of family or something, I think what he means is just this battery cell overheating and then propagating to other battery cells and it creating an exponential problem.
It going full Galaxy Note 7 or whatever that one was that would spontaneously combust.
Yeah. But so if that is a big thing to look at too, because you can't have if something on Starliner goes wrong, then something on the station could go wrong too, and then you involve the international partners, and the international partners have to be okay with certain risks, and so NASA's weighing all of that too, I think, as it decides how to keep Starliner on the station.
Do we know what the maximum Dragon can stay up there is? I don't know if we've ever heard how long Crew 8 could stay, right? Because that launched in March 4th. So it will hit its 6 months in September. I don't know if we've ever even asked about how long could you keep a Dragon on station.
That's a good question. I think with that number, I'm sure we've asked that question before. I just can't remember the number. But yeah, I don't know. I want to say, I don't know. I actually don't want to say anything and be wrong, but But like, there's also the NASA astronaut, I can't remember who, but she took the Soyuz capsule up there too. So technically, the Crew Dragon expedition could come home and they would still have a U.S. presence on the station. So that might not be an issue.
We're just back to the old style. Yeah.
Right.
Then we're like, this is a real. I mean, it is not stressful at the current moment, but it is a situation because now the things we've just discussed is when do spaceships run out of time, when do batteries potentially explode, and when do you run out of food, let alone the clothes that Butch and Sunny do not have. So, like, one of these things will run short first, and I guess patience would be the fifth one. And NASA has already lost their patience for us in particular. I would love to talk about that a little bit because I don't know if we've taken a deep dive on NASA and Boeing being mad at people like you, Jacqueline, who say anyone is stuck on board and they want to be clear.
I mean, I feel like in some ways this is just the nature of journalism, is fighting with PR people over words that are technically right, but they don't really like them. But I do think, I mean, Tim wrote for us the story about, like, you know, Starliner's very, very long, bad journey to the ISS is finally ending with this launch. And it really has been kind of like the beginning of like the next not so great chapter, in addition to everything else Boeing has going on. So I get the sensitivity. I get the concern over the word stuck. You know, one of our reporters pointed out, like, if I'm at home and my mom asks, like, when I'm coming to visit for Christmas, and I can't tell her, I'm not stuck in my apartment. So I get the logic, but...
Yeah, but at the same time, if your flight is delayed, you say, I'm stuck at the airport. Or if you're sitting on the tarmac, you're stuck in the... I mean, in that case, you are kind of stuck in the airplane because you're not going to open the door up. But the airport, for sure, you're stuck at the airport. You could leave. You totally could leave.
Right.
But you are stuck at the airport.
And the astronauts could theoretically leave in an emergency scenario. But that's a great point. And in fact, like, one of my colleagues just made that exact point too, because it's something that I'm kind of debating with, like at Reuters too. I think everyone's newsroom is kind of going through this. People who don't cover Starliner closely is like, why the hell can't we say they're lost or stranded in space, or stuck in space? But I think to be stuck in space has more important implications than what they're currently going through now. Like, if someone's truly stuck in space, they don't have any ride. And like, as long as they say Starliner can bring them home in an emergency, I think that makes it a little harder to say they're actually stuck in space. And it's such a dramatic situation and people get angry when you say it. And so it's like, let's just describe what is going on, instead of, you know, playing into like I don't know. Maybe they'll actually be stuck in space at some point, that we'll all start saying that, but
they're not yet.
Maybe not yet. Yeah.
The thing that there's two parts of it that NASA, I find, like, just talking about the communications of it, that I find NASA and Boeing having been, having caused some of this chaos. In that there's one side of it which is, you can tell the difference between NASA very specifically avoiding saying something and just explaining something poorly. Like, those are clear differences. We've experienced both of those varieties. And this one was clearly dancing around. I think it was you, Joey, that asked, like, you've said that they're cleared for emergency, but do you need to wait for this testing on the ground to finish before they would be cleared for return? And that had been asked on a couple different calls, and they were always exceedingly careful answering that particular question, which I felt didn't actually clarify the situation, because you're tiptoeing around what you actually need out of this testing. And that creates us all going like, oh, so they do actually need the testing before they come home. That's issue one in my eye.
Yeah, and I think given the totality of all these vague things that everyone's been saying, like all the officials have been saying, I think it's clear that they need the testing before they make the call to nominally return them home. They've said they need to build a better flight rationale with more data from more testing to make that decision. If a Russian satellite blows up in space and they need to undock from the station, then they can do that in Starliner. I think because the risks of staying on the station in the event of an emergency are greater than the risks of taking Starliner off the station. But what's interesting about that is when Sunny was asked about that on the station, I think last week, she was explaining that, like, in the event of emergency, like, we'll get in the Starliner. I'm confident we'll be able to get in the Starliner, and then NASA will figure out the next steps. It wasn't like and then Starliner will bring us
and
home.
And I'll fly home. Yeah.
Instead, and then I trust that they'll be able to figure out what to do next. So it's like, are you guys just going to float freestyle in orbit until someone comes up with a plan? How long will that take? And so that's the next line of questioning that we haven't really been able to get out yet. But yeah, I think I also want to just make one other point, which is, why did Boeing say that this mission was going to be 8 days if they knew that they were going to run into issues? I think the communications strategy kind of set themselves up for a PR failure here. SpaceX, when they did DM2, they didn't announce any cutoff date. The duration of that mission hinged on the mission needs on the it was more relevant to what was needed on the ISS because of the political situation that made it short-staffed. But and so they didn't name a cutoff date for that mission. But they did for this mission, while Mark Nappy was over here saying, like, we're going to run into a bunch of issues on this flight. We expect problems to arise. And I think with that, they shouldn't have said this is going to be 8 days, because obviously it wasn't. But then it was also even confusing because you had Butch also saying, like, oh, we'll see you in a few weeks. Like, before they launched, he was talking to, the ground control. He's like, we'll see you in a few weeks. And so it's like, what? I thought it was 8 days. So the communications on the duration, I think, was just a total cluster.
The other part that you talked about there, though, is the need to finish testing. This is one aspect where I found lack of clarity. Is it that you need to finish this testing because you don't know how you want to fly the spaceship home, or do you need to finish the testing because this is your only chance at testing the service module for the next year? Like, there's not another opportunity to use this service module. It's back and forth on that one, so I don't have a good vibe on what does need actually mean. Is it literally like you're saying that Sony's like, I hope they know what way to go home, or this is the chance we have because the hardware's up there right now?
I think it can be both. It's either the answer is either they're up there to keep testing to help inform certification, or it's both that and they need to stay up there to figure out a better rationale to get home. I don't think it could be alone on its own figuring out a rationale to get home, because in any case, the longer you're on the station, any data you're getting is going to inform certification.
Yeah. And that's the other aspect, is that I think we also are always presented this as NASA and Boeing are on these calls together, when there might be times where NASA is requiring things of Boeing that they're not going to go say on the call. So maybe NASA says, we won't clear you to return until you find the root cause and test it in space. So if you're not able to find that and we run out of time, we'll clear you for landing because you can fly home. But until you've told us for sure, this is all pure conjecture, satire and projection, but like, until you find the root cause, we are not going to sign this paperwork. If you find that you can't find it in this time limit, we'll sign it, but we're not giving you that signature right now. Like that, there could be much more of that relationship behind the scenes than we actually know.
Right. And it's a fixed price contract where Boeing has more responsibilities than NASA, but the flight rules are jointly established, and NASA is very involved in figuring what's going on here, but how they're going to figure this out. But one just crucial point, I think, is the White Sands testing. That testing was responsive to the issues that they found in flight. That was not planned before the mission, and I don't think they would have done that if there weren't issues to solve. And Stitch and I think Bowersox have said that the results of that they have said the results of that test will determine when and how we bring them home. So I think it's clear that the testing is required before they bring them home. What throws everyone into confusion is the way Stitch and others are saying we want this testing. They're never saying we need this testing. I think that's just a consequence of how they try to make things easy to understand. But in this case, it's really actually complicating things.
I think this conversation has really like shown all the problems with NASA's communication strategy around this, right? Like it feels to me like NASA is like, we'll just kind of project this air of everything is fine. But then, because astronauts' potential lives are at risk, like I think they want to kind of be like the calming presence in the room, but by not just being more forthcoming and more straightforward, you have people speculating about what could be a worst case scenario. And I think, especially outside of the space community, it definitely feeds a lot of that. People who don't understand, what a thruster issue is and what this testing is. All they know is that this thing is up there. It was supposed to come home a long time ago, and there are all these questions. So it definitely feels like a situation where, they think it's better to give less information, but it's kind of breeding this rampant questioning and speculation.
Yeah. And I didn't cover like the shuttle program. That was before my time, but NASA was way more forthcoming about issues then and before its commercial model trend. But since companies have more responsibility and a greater stake in this, things are more proprietary and things are more secretive, and NASA feels like it has less control over what it can say publicly. And this Starliner mission is a major example, like maybe the biggest example so far, of how the communications around the commercial model missions are problematic. Because like you said, Jack, like it allows misinformation and speculation and other issues to foment in the absence of accurate information.
I started off a numbered list 10 minutes ago, and I'm finally getting to number 2 because it's exactly that point. The other failure of communication here is like the failure of imagination of doing news about Boeing in 2024. And NASA does so much work to head off a lot of this when it comes to anything with SpaceX, because they know all the headlines are going to be like Elon Musk's rocket explodes and Elon Musk's spaceship almost kills astronauts, and there's going to be a whole generation of headlines written about that. And so they do extra work in those cases to bring on non-Elon representatives from SpaceX to talk about stuff and highlight them and shape the communications knowing the environment they're projecting this news into. And I feel like this was totally ignorant of that in an era where Boeing is being the way they are in the last, how many years has it been since Boeing has been in the thick of it? Like, I don't know when you would classify the beginning of this era. The first 737 MAX thing, I guess, until now, which is years at this point. And so you have to know that in the nightly news, it's going to be Boeing Starliner thing happened, and also the FAA reported about this 787 thing. Those are going to be linked together in the news. They're going to be put next to each other. They're going to be put in comparison. People are going to feel the same way about it, and it's going to be memed.
It's the same company.
You're going to get that response. So you need to be aware of that, and whether that's drawing a thicker line between the ISS program and Boeing rather than feeling like this joint force on these calls, I don't know exactly what that means, but it just feels like they didn't do any of that pre-gaming in this case.
Yeah. The answer can't be like if I'm a communications person, I didn't study communications, I don't know how to do it, but like I don't think the answer is restricting information and trying to craft clever narratives about what's going on. I think the answer is to give us what we need to tell the accurate story. The astronauts are not in immediate danger, but the absence of information and the speculation that comes out of that leads people to think they are. So NASA needs to take a look at its commercial contracts and give itself more power in saying what it needs to say to prevent, inflammatory narratives from spinning out of control. And I was going to make another point, but I just forgot. Sorry.
I do think that goes both ways too, though. Like I've definitely heard from companies who are like, we'd love to talk with you, but NASA has this 17-step process to approve press releases, and like it's harming both sides in terms of talking to the press. The public-private partnerships, both the government and the industry, like the companies feel, I think, that they're a little handcuffed when it comes to sharing information.
Exactly. Like NASA's not fully innocent here. Like they have, I think and we've called them out on the press conferences. There was one press conference where a lot of us voiced our concerns with how they communicate things, and they really revolve much of it around these somewhat rare press conferences, but more so around these blog posts that go out at like 6, 7 p.m. late at night, sometimes on a Friday night, and that really throws everything into chaos, and it just doesn't look good. And like the biggest problem there is when I ask or email a NASA spokesperson for information about Starliner, or I ask them a very basic question, they don't answer it until they have their blog post later that night, or they'll refer us to some forthcoming blog posts. That's not how any agency does it. And NASA, whose one of its core mandates is to communicate the science and the technology that it does in the world, should live up to a better standard than that.
It's also, as you talk about, releasing these press releases at 6 p.m. on a Friday, like, I don't think NASA has ever done like Friday night news dumps before this, right? This is for like bad political news and firings, and like NASA is the agency that's always like fighting for press and trying to get their stories told. So even the fact that they're like participating in sort of this Friday evening news dump to try to hide stuff is like a really remarkable thing.
Yeah. They have, it's rare that they pull out the Friday night news dump. They have in this case, and it's just a beast to reckon with.
The thing you left out about that call was just the best start to a call ever, which was, we're coming in this call mad at the press. So the first thing I'm going to do is specifically tell everyone that I'm mad and you covered this poorly, except for, who did he call out? Ken Kramer or something? He called out one particular person of like, this one story was great, but the rest of my Google alerts are driving me nuts, and I would like to tell you all that so as to provoke better coverage. It's like, I mean, should we send him the link to the Streisand effect, or like what is he expecting out of this statement? That was a bizarre.
Well, I also don't know how much like the media's concerns are being communicated to people like Mark Nappy. I think that call was just important because they started the call with a lot of critiques about how we're covering their mission, and then we of course used our time to push back on that. And by the end of the call, they sounded very understanding and willing to do what we think that they should do, and they have done that. They did the astronaut presser, which is one of the chief demands that we had on that call, and then they had the deorbit vehicle presser too, albeit 3 weeks later. But so they seemed responsive to our concerns, and I think that is good.
Let's see. I was going to say that they've taken your advice to not do Friday afternoon news dumps, and this time did a Wednesday afternoon news dump, which was Vipers canceled. I don't know if we want to spend like 5 minutes talking about this, maybe 10 minutes. I don't know.
I was surprised. I mean, I'll just quickly say I didn't really cover that very closely, but I was surprised that wasn't a dump. That was like, 2 p.m., 3 p.m. in the middle of a week. I think that was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's obviously very sad for the space science community that this spacecraft is literally like done and put together and just awaiting environmental testing, and they're going to take it apart and just stop. It's very sad. Well,
first they're going to see if they can give it away. Hold on.
Well,
they're going to see if they can give it to somebody first.
Which is hysterical. We had like a funny top of the newsletter where I'm like, it looked great in our headquarters if we weren't a remote organization, but they're just going to like give this away to someone, which is hysterical. But we had a very funny moment internally. One of our reporters was like, oh, like, I hope this isn't about the Viper mission. That's such a cool mission. And as he was saying this in Slack, it was like canceled.
It was funny too when I posted that, because nothing in the headline said like, we're going to talk about the lunar program, but there was a picture of the moon, and then somewhere in like third paragraph said something about lunar exploration. So they were tiptoeing into that one too. But it is not shocking that it has ended up in this point. We have talked about for a long time that this has creeped its way into New Frontiers level budget. Like if you and there's been OIG reports and all this about it, but if you combine spacecraft and launch and landing, it was nearing $1 billion, assuming that all the rest of the testing went well from here to liftoff. And then the other complicating factor is if they missed next launch window, they had to wait 9 to 12 months or something before the lighting was right again because the South Pole is weird. So it had potential to get north of $1 billion before it even made it to the moon. Factor that in with the situation that Astrobotic's in after Peregrine unfolded the way it did. Like, nothing about the mission was set up for success in really any way. But then you're right, Jacqueline, that like they said as of June 4th or something, it's put together and going into testing. So this is, if it actually, I don't know if it's not going to do any testing from based on that call. Like they're not even going to do any of the testing.
It's gonna be a mass simulator.
Well, that's the other part are they just going to take the instruments off and then that's the mass simulator is like the actual structure of the thing? I'm actually curious what they will put.
Yeah. I don't know. I want to, like, I think it would be cool to think of something that could go in its place. Like, I was thinking, like I've always thought about how interesting it would be to put some kind of like payload on the moon as a reporter that would like help me cover the moon missions in the future. And this is like extremely like, unrealistic.
He's the one of us not drinking right now, just to clarify that having the most dorm room conversation ever. What can I put on the moon? And maybe yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah, but I don't know what that would be. Like I just thought like, oh, mass simulator mission going to the moon. Is this an opportunity like for anyone? Is this an opportunity for me? That's not how I think about space stories ever. But like,
Roulette,
if I wanted to put something on the moon, then like. What would you, I'm curious, like if Payload wanted to do that, Jacqueline, like how could we use that for like a
450 kilograms of stuff.
Like a camera? Keep track?
Right, I'm thinking like a camera or like a sensor. I don't know.
I love this thought process because I have literally no idea what, like the South Pole's pretty weird. It would be cool. Just
I would do like
a bust of yourself.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be cool to do like a 360-degree camera if it was in a location where there were going to be other missions in the future. But I don't think that's the case.
And especially like you talk about like transparency in space. Like, you know, if China launched a mission to the moon or like North Korea launched a mission to the moon someday, we could be like, there it is. Like we see their rover coming. Like that. It'd be like really cool. Like accountability. Who's on the moon?
Right.
This is getting pretty for all mankind. I love it. I'm here for this South Pole.
So NASA,
geopolitical stuff. Yeah.
To tie it all together, NASA owes us better transparency, so they should let us
manage the mass simulator.
A press simulator on the moon.
Wow. This is excellent. I have no idea where this is going, but I love every bit of it, and I feel like we at least know a couple people that we could talk to about this. So.
Yeah.
Who do you think?
I'm doing an RFI, request for information.
All right, so if it's not the Joy Roulette Space Agency that offers this by August 1st. By the way, you have like 12 days if you want to put that proposal together, Joey.
Well, no, that's for the Viper, right? But like,
you could just say
to convince NASA to turn the mass simulator into something.
Well, I'm just saying. What if you? Yeah, you're playing chess. I'm playing checkers. Is that how that phrase goes? Offer to NASA to take over the rover. We rent a big van. We go pick it up. We drive to Pittsburgh, and we swap out some components. And we say, "This is our commercial payload going on board. That it's cooler than the mass simulator NASA's going to send. Have a good time." So you could do it. But who's gonna pick it up? ESA, as one of the lunar rover companies, gonna pick it up. As a troll, would Astrobotic say we'll take
it? Israel's thing. They could get back in the business. I don't think they exist anymore. But
they don't. I thought they were doing a third one.
I don't know.
I'll look that up.
I don't know. I think they have other priorities right now. Unfortunately.
What I was wondering about is like how big the Astrolab rover is compared to Viper. Payload wise, I think it's bigger or heavier, but they were going to send one separately than the first demonstration mission of the lunar terrain vehicle thing. I don't know. Do you remember that? Remember the Astrolab rover? There's too many rovers.
Yeah, well, there's too many different components to all this program, but I don't know the size of the Astrolab rover. It came to DC one time, and I had the opportunity to look at it, but I didn't. But I know the Viper thing, I had described it as like a golf cart size, and then Joel Kearns yesterday was like, people have described it as a golf cart thing, but it's really like a small sedan. So I guess...
What a weird way to gatekeep on that, sedan. Too.
I know.
It's more of a smart car, to be honest. You know, it's like, it does have some windows, so... Yeah, it's just a weird... Like, there's two ways to look at it. Everyone's disappointed that this thing's canceled, because it would have been a really cool mission. At the same time, Jake in the chat is raging about the way that these missions have been handled by NASA for a long time, where they set cost caps and never enforce them, which sends the signal that these are like things you don't really need to worry about. And in the last year, there have been moments where they are now enforcing those, right? They are, and whether that's just because of budgetary pressure, they finally are like, well, now we have to, because we can't just let the growing budget handle it. But you've got the Janus spacecraft sitting in storage. They are through testing. They're not even like waiting on testing. They are ready to go spacecraft that are missed their ride because the ride changed, and they're just sitting there and are canceled. You've got this one that is completed and not going anywhere. And then the other aspect of this all, though, is what does this mean for Dragonfly? That is on the higher end of budget and also exploding in cost and complexity and schedule. At the same time, the Mars sample return is in absolute chaos. Like, nothing is in a good spot there, and all the budget wedges are wedging at the same time. So, you know, what if you're any mission, like who feels good about their mission in terms of the budget right now?
Right. And
you
it's
need
like,
to have someone that goes to bat for it. Like Culberson back in the day would fight anyone about Europa Clipper, but other than that, and then there was the era where like Mikulski was going to bat for any mission out of the Maryland area. I don't really know any other congressperson that has been going to bat for planetary missions. The California delegation about Mars sample return? I don't know. What else is up in the DC area these days, Jacqueline?
Yeah, I mean, California delegation wrote a letter about Mars sample return, but it was not the same way as like the Culberson or like, if you guys remember Perlmutter, he was always like, we're going to Mars. Like it was more on the human exploration than on the planetary science, but there aren't like the same, not that there aren't lawmakers who are very pro-space, like Representative Frank Lucas is like all about space. Like there are, but there aren't the same sort of figureheads to fight for these programs now. They all just either retired or lost. Like I can't think of like a Dragonfly person. I know.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, like that, this raises a good point though, which is I think like too often there's like the sunk cost fallacy in space missions where you invest too much, you invest so much that you can't imagine pulling out of it or canceling it. And I think like the Collins spacesuit contract thing, when they like backed out of that contract and they're not going to build any spacesuits anymore. I think that is a good example of not giving into the sunk cost fallacy and knowing when to back out of a program before it becomes such a huge beast that's just sucking finances where it could go elsewhere. And maybe that's what Viper was going to do. And those are really important, like involved programmatic decisions that Congress people aren't usually privy to. Like, obviously lawmakers have interests for their districts, but like interests, like political interests and scientific value and interests relative to other missions are two totally different things. So yeah, I don't know. I think like there's a silver lining, I think, to the Viper cancellation in that people are more willing to call something out before it becomes something bigger.
God, I totally disagree, but I'm like, we should just spend all of our money on cool space stuff, right? But
ideally, yeah.
There was a hearing on James Webb Space Telescope when it was like way over budget, way behind, and lawmakers were like, why shouldn't we pull the plug? And Bridenstine was like, because this is going to be effing awesome. And they put the money in and it's awesome, right? Like, and you don't know what's going to be awesome until you get there. Like, what would Viper have found that we're not going to find now, or that someone else is going to find? Like, I understand there's not unlimited money. I understand that the budget is like a wreck and that NASA is never going to come out on top. But I think we've seen stuff that's over budget and delayed that has like been on the threat of being canceled, that has done such cool stuff that it's still like a loss when stuff like this is canceled.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Like, and I think a big point to that was like, I think Phil Metzger and others on that were tweeting about this were saying that, you know, what we're losing with the cancellation of Viper is nothing that we're going to be able to get from other missions. NASA was making it seem like we're going to do the same kind of research on other and elsewhere within the Artemis program, but that's not really the case. So I agree with you there. Like, I mean, if NASA was not under the threat of like, you know, if they didn't have this huge budget cloud hovering over them, then that would be great to keep Viper. But like, but it's like also, you know, dare I mention SLS too? That has become such a financial beast. And it's such a big jobs program for a capability that is not very sought after by anyone other than NASA.
Well, wait for the report about the demand for non-NASA payloads on the vehicle.
I mean,
just wait.
You don't have to go far. I had a story where I asked the DoD, like, do you guys want SLS? And they straight up said on the record, no, we have no need for the SLS. And it's like, who else? Like, anyone? Like, maybe ESA or like another country, but like, where would that fit in the Artemis manifest? Like, it wouldn't. So I don't know. I just think it's all, we can go down that or we can't.
It's all mayhem.
Sorry to speak.
I want to talk about Firefly because, Jacqueline, you brought up this great story by Tim a couple of days ago, 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Very prescient. I don't know if he knew where this was going at the time, but since then, things have transpired. So fill us in. What's going on here?
Yes, yeah. Tim did a great job staying on top of the story. And in the days that followed, no other media really picked up on it. And we were very much out on an island. And then, of course, just last night, the other shoe dropped and the CEO of Firefly is no more with Firefly. So yeah, the company was investigating him for this alleged inappropriate relationship with one of his female employees. You know, it's something we've seen before with launch company CEOs. And yeah, the investigation, you know, the company said that they hadn't found anything so far in the investigation. But then just a couple days later, he was, you know, had out as CEO, and they're starting the hunt for the next CEO. It sounds like from a lot of Tim's reporting that morale overall at the company is pretty bad, and that, you know, someone or employee reported this relationship and then kind of lost faith in leadership, the way it was handled, and resigned after that. So yeah, it was an exciting week. We were obviously thrilled to break the news. And then to see, you know, the fallout just a couple days later has been wild.
And Max Polyakov is now absolved of the CFIUS restrictions. What's the right word to use in that case? Restrictions, yeah. I guess. So yeah, now what? Like, is he making a triumphant return, or is that it? He's moved on with his life. I don't know.
I have no idea.
I don't know for sure either, but they have a war going on, and I know they have a big stake in the implications of that. And so maybe they're not as focused or interested in the U.S. launch sector as they were pre-CFIUS booting. But yeah, I think it's interesting that CFIUS reversed this decision against them. Yeah, we don't really know.
Too. Like,
Yeah.
What took so long? And also, I've had vibes about Firefly lately that are weird, because like I would occasionally think of them and be like, man, it's been a while since that last flight that they did, and they have had so many upper stage issues, and it took them a long time to get back flying each time. And then they would have a different upper stage issue. This last one seemed to have gone well, or as well as it meant to. They didn't publish the target orbit before flight, which felt intentional to me. So I just don't feel like they've had the pace that you would expect from a company that has flown as many times as they have. They're still on this slow version of it. And is that what you're saying, Jacqueline, that like morale sucks there, so it's not a very... Does morale suck because the workplace sucks and that's what makes bad product? Or, which one of these things came first?
Tough to tell. I mean, I know Tim reported that there have been like a lot of departures, so it's obviously hard to make progress if you're losing a lot of your engineers and your talent over the last couple months. That obviously doesn't explain the issues going back further. But yeah, I know the launch that recently happened, we kind of wrote it as like, are they ready for prime time? Like, is this going to be like the breakout launch that they do start picking up operations and kind of launching on a more frequent cadence? I think it's still to be seen for the tech, but it seems like the sort of leadership of the company is going to be, it's going to be a while before it stabilizes for sure after all this.
Where did Bill Weber even come from? He was part of the whole like private equity takeover, but was he spacey at all before that? I don't get the sense that he was. I don't know what
he did before, but he did like take over the company when AE bought the company in 2022.
I'm literally going to his LinkedIn right now, so hold on. We're doing some research here. No, like nothing. No, it's all just like random corporate-y things. So I think that's the other
he
aspect.
Embraced that too. Like he would embrace that in conversation. Like he brings a fresh perspective to running a launch business.
Sure, it's just also there's a thing though that all the companies that are moving fast and efficiently are at the current moment generally run by founders who are into space. Like that's where that industry is at the moment. There are so many pitfalls with all the founders out there for sure, but the companies that are doing the best are the people that had a strong vision and saw a way towards that vision by way of other programs. Honestly, part of me, that is part of why I'm like side-eyeing SpaceX's decision to continue to get into the US deorbit vehicle contracts and gateway logistics and things that are a little bit outside of their typical path. Like, they want to eat it all. They want to do all of the different missions, and I get that. But there's still something to the companies that have been able to focus to some extent, but be gritty about how they get there. Like NanoRacks is a good example. I've always felt like a gritty company who just figure out programs to be involved in that are relevant enough to what they're working on. But then Firefly has always felt weird. Like when they got the Clips contract and they were still where they were with Alpha, and then they were like, also we're partnering with Northrop Grumman to build new Antares. It just felt like a decorator crab. They were just grabbing shit that floated by and attaching it to their shell and being like, that looks pretty cool. That feels like it fits.
Yeah. We have to do that. Let's do that one too. I think the when we talk about Max Polyakov and their former Noosphere roots, I'm pretty sure the Blue Ghost lunar lander had some kind of Ukrainian heritage or ties to Noosphere that when Noosphere was booted out complicated things with the future of Blue Ghost. And I mentioned that idea in a story one time, and Firefly was not happy about it. But so I'm curious to see how Blue Ghost fares, not just because of that, but I assume they've obviously adapted that lander to have more U.S. roots, and I think it's a more independent system now, and they expect to launch it, obviously. But this CEO ouster is just the latest for a company that has been through so much other shit in the past.
I also think that what you're talking about is becoming like more than norm for launch companies. Like I wrote like a state of the launch industry story in April, and Rocket Lab is doing more than just launch, and Relativity has like a 3D printing business, and ULA is really one of the only launch companies that's just doing launch. So you can argue like for or against the business model, but I think launch companies by and large are getting into kind of other industries to launch their own stuff.
Does Relativity have a 3D printing business? Because I think that's an interesting
or is Relativity a 3D printing business? Has been my whole theory all along. Yes.
But they've tried to focus so much on, like when we talk about a company focusing on their mission, they have refused for so long to use 3D printers for anything other than printing rockets. I haven't checked in on them in a while.
I've heard different. I've heard that they are involved in some programs that are more on the classified budget side of things, but that also is not helped by the fact that they canceled their first rocket because it kept cracking because they were printing it and it cracked and it wasn't good. So like that is a little bit complicated. Yeah.
Right. Well, they decided to cancel that rocket long before the rocket's accident, like a year before, I think.
Because it was cracking. It was all the cracks.
Because it was cracking. Oh, right. Yeah. Sure.
This was like an Encanto situation. I don't know if Encanto is more of just Jacqueline and I's territory on this situation, but.
Okay.
Tim Ellis is the Mirabelle of Relativity. I do like, though, that of the examples you listed, Jacqueline, like the only less sure business model than launch is lunar landers, and Firefly was like, that's the one. We're doing that one. We're going there.
That's true.
We're going to the one with more with less but higher ratio of companies that have gone out of business in this department before. So that's good. But give me the over-unders real quick on Max Polyakov returns, Northrop Grumman buys Firefly, or random CEO enters and continues random private equitying of the company. What's the power ranking of those scenarios?
Random CEO, most likely.
Yeah.
That would be my bet.
Then I'm thinking Northrop Grumman. At some point, Northrop Grumman's buying this company, right?
Didn't Lockheed just make some kind of strategic?
Lockheed does that to everybody. Lockheed will just like, if you got a small launcher and you paint it black, we will throw some money your way. Like that's the trick for them. So.
Sure. Well, I think Max's return is least likely.
Yeah.
All right. Joey's in the running to be the CEO and acquire Viper as a mass simulator to be used on the moon for reporters' sake. So you heard it here first. Before we're out of here, for both of you, people should follow along with what you're working on. Joey, what should people check out that you've been working on these days?
You can follow me on Twitter. I don't tweet that much, but just read Reuters. Reuters is awesome. We do awesome work. But I'm focusing a lot on Starliner, Falcon 9, return to flight whenever that happens. And I think international security in space is interesting too. So, yeah.
Jacqueline, what you up to these days? You got a whole thing going on at Payload these days.
Yeah, so people should definitely subscribe to our daily newsletter. We send Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. You can subscribe at payloodspace.com. We're obviously covering all the news of the day that Joey just mentioned, but I will do a quick plug for Tim was recently over in Japan and did a lot of good reporting. He was at these 2 different conferences and talked with high-ranking people at a lot of Japanese space startups. So we are going to have a series of stories that are going to start publishing tomorrow, actually. So you're getting like the sneak peek about sort of the state of Japanese space startups and the commercial space industry there. That I have read the one that's publishing tomorrow, and it's very interesting. So people should definitely check those out.
That's awesome.
We got to get Tim back on because Tim came on and I think Jake enjoyed it because he and I sort of fought about the Space Force for like 20 minutes, and we had a great time, and it was lovely. So we gotta get him back on here. That was a good time, man. Wait, was he was in? There was some conference going on over in South Korea. Where'd you say he was? Japan?
Tokyo. Yep.
Tokyo. He's far away. That's a trip, man. That's legit. That's a travel budget right there. That's some things that the independent podcaster section are not blessed with as a travel budget of any regard. So Next week, I've got a fun one next week. Jake's still traveling, so what I thought I would do is get both of my favorite LGs on the show at the same time. So Lauren Grush and Lori Garver are going to hang out, and we're doing the LGs episode. So if I've left out any LGs that come to mind, I'm sorry, but I feel like I got all of them. I don't know if any other LGs. So neither of you are offended, so I guess I didn't miss any. Which is good. But, all right, everybody, thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next week. Bye.